living as a hermit. A quiet life disrupted by a stunning alien princess, HFY, Sci-Fi. Ethan had always sought peace in solitude. After years of living in the chaotic hustle and bustle of Earth's overcrowded cities, he retreated to a remote cabin in the mountains, far from civilization. No phones, no internet, and no one to bother him. Just the whisper of the wind through the trees, the rustling of the leaves, and the distant call of birds. It was the life he had dreamed of, free from the noise and demands of society. For 5 years, this solitary existence was all Ethan ever needed. He spent his days hiking, reading, and thinking, enjoying the simplicity of life that had eluded him for so long. His mind had found its peace, and his heart was content. But that peace shattered one crisp autumn evening. Ethan had just finished a long walk, his boots crunching on the forest floor, when he saw it, an ethereal glow cutting through the trees. It wasn't the moon or the stars. It was something different, something otherworldly. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, but his curiosity overpowered any hesitation. He followed the light, each step quickening as he moved deeper into the forest. The source of the glow was a massive, sleek, metallic craft. Its surface shimmered with an iridescent sheen, and strange symbols pulsed along the sides. It looked like no aircraft he had ever seen, certainly not anything Earth could have built. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached, the air around him suddenly feeling charged, as though the very atmosphere had been altered. A hatch opened in the side of the craft, and from the light inside, a figure emerged. She was tall and graceful, with smooth, translucent skin that glowed faintly in the twilight. Her long, flowing hair shimmered with an almost otherworldly hue, shifting from silver to violet in the soft glow. Her eyes, large and luminous, met Ethan's gaze with an intensity that made his breath catch. She was stunning, alien, yet unmistakably beautiful. What are you? Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. He had never been one to panic, but there was something undeniably powerful about her presence. The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him with curiosity, as if assessing whether he posed any threat. Then, she spoke in perfect English, though her accent was strange, melodic. I am Princess Theloria of the Tenerife people. I seek refuge, and you are the one I have been led to. Ethan blinked, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Refuge? From what? How did you find me? The stars whispered your name. Theloria replied softly. I was drawn to you by your solitude. It is peaceful here. Ethan's mind raced. He had never heard of any aliens reaching Earth, let alone a princess landing in his backyard. The concept was so absurd that it almost felt like a dream. Why me? I'm just a hermit. I don't know anything about intergalactic diplomacy or... Theloria raised a hand, cutting him off. I do not seek a king, nor an army. I seek a place of peace, away from the forces that hunt me. The universe is vast and full of dangers. I was pursued by my enemies, but I escaped. To you. His thoughts swirled, and despite the shock, something deep inside him stirred. The idea of helping this alien princess, of playing a role in something so grand and beyond his understanding, felt impossible to ignore. His quiet life, so long untouched by the complexities of the world, was suddenly swept away by forces far beyond his comprehension. What do you need from me? Ethan asked, his voice steady now, though he felt anything but. I need sanctuary, protection, Theloria replied, her eyes searching his face as if pleading for help, and perhaps, guidance. Ethan swallowed, looking at the glowing ship that had landed in his peaceful world. He had lived for so long in solitude, far from the noise and troubles of civilization. But now, it seemed, the universe had come knocking, quite literally. His life had been simple, but it had also been quiet, too quiet, perhaps. Now, it seemed, he was being pulled into something much bigger. The idea of standing up for someone, of helping someone as beautiful and mysterious as Theloria, stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in years. And then, in an odd way, it made sense. His entire life had been about seeking peace. But sometimes peace didn't come without a cost, without disruption. He could retreat again into the mountains, back to his life of isolation. But he couldn't ignore the pull of fate. This was his chance to be part of something extraordinary. All right, Ethan said, his voice resolute. You can stay here, for now. But we'll need to figure out what's going on. I'm not just going to hide you away. I'm no hero. Thaloria's face softened with gratitude, her gaze warm. You are more of a hero than you know. Ethan looked back at the glowing ship, then at the vast, unbroken wilderness surrounding them. His life, once so quiet and isolated, was about to change in ways he couldn't yet fathom. And in that moment, he realized something important. Even in the quietest corners of the universe, there could be moments of extraordinary, unimaginable change. Days turned into weeks as Ethan found himself drawn deeper into the enigma of Princess Thaloria's past. She told him stories of intergalactic wars, of her people, and the enemies that had chased her across the stars. He never expected to be thrust into a conflict of this scale, but every day, he saw how the galaxy was so much larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Though his life as a hermit was gone, Ethan found a new purpose, one that involved not just survival but standing up for something much greater than himself. And while his days of quiet isolation were over, he had come to realize that some disruptions could be the beginning of an entirely new chapter, one that would be written in the stars. And perhaps, just perhaps, the universe had been waiting for him all along. As the days wore on, Ethan's once serene life began to change rapidly. Princess Thaloria, despite her otherworldly beauty and grace, was not the only unusual presence in his home. The ship she arrived in had an advanced communication system that allowed her to send signals across the galaxy, signals that Ethan had no idea how to decipher, but which Thaloria insisted would alert her people of her whereabouts. "Do you think they'll come for you?" Ethan asked one night as they sat in the small cabin, the fire crackling softly in the background. He'd grown accustomed to her presence, but the weight of the situation had not fully settled. "I am not sure," Thaloria replied, staring at the flames as though they held the answers. "The Teneriv are a peaceful people, but there are factions among them that would use my position for power. Some would prefer to see me dead." The words struck Ethan harder than he expected. Here was a princess, a being from beyond the stars, forced to run for her life. The scale of the danger was something he couldn't fully grasp, but he saw the pain in her eyes, the fear of an unknown fate, an invisible enemy that could be waiting anywhere, even within her own people. "You said they were hunting you," Ethan said, leaning forward. "Who are these enemies? What do they want from you?" "They are known as the Zorak," Thaloria explained, her voice tense. "A militaristic faction that seeks control over the Teneriv Empire. They believe that by conquering me, they can seize power. I am the heir to the throne, and my survival is the key to the balance of power." Ethan felt his heart race. A galactic war had come to his doorstep. But more than that, it wasn't just a war. It was a fight for a throne, for power, and for the future of an entire people. The quiet life he had carved out for himself was slipping away, replaced by something he had never imagined: danger, responsibility, and the weight of fate. "I never asked for this," he muttered, almost to himself. "You didn't have to," Thaloria said softly, "but you have already made a choice by letting me stay." Ethan sat back, his mind whirling. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for this. All he wanted was peace. But now, that peace was threatened, not just by the Zorak, but by the overwhelming reality of what it meant to harbor an alien princess. They would come for her eventually, and when they did, it wouldn't just be her life at stake, it would be his as well. As though sensing his doubts, Thaloria spoke again. "I did not choose you because I thought you were a warrior. I chose you because you understand the value of peace. The Zorak will come, and they will be relentless. But we must fight for something greater, for the freedom of my people, and for the chance to stop the violence." Ethan's thoughts were a storm. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. This wasn't his world. The technology alone, the ships, the weapons, the alien politics, it was too much. Yet, somehow, the idea of doing nothing didn't sit well with him. He had been a hermit, isolated from everything. Now, the universe had come to his door, and it wasn't leaving. "I'm not a fighter, Thaloria," Ethan said, his voice low. "I'm just a man who wanted to be left alone." "You have already done more than you know," she replied, her voice calm, yet resolute. "You've given me sanctuary, and that is more than any soldier could. But I cannot face the Zorak alone. They are ruthless, and they will not hesitate." For the first time, Ethan understood. This was no longer about helping a stranger, it was about fighting for the ideals he had abandoned. Peace wasn't just the absence of war, it was the preservation of what was good, the protection of those who needed it. The Loria had come to him not just as a princess, but as a symbol, a person who needed help to stop an empire from being overtaken by violence and greed. He sighed deeply, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. I still don't know how to fight, but I won't just sit here while they come for you. The Loria's eyes softened, and a small, grateful smile touched her lips. That is all I ask, Ethan. Together, we can figure this out. The next few weeks were filled with preparations. The Loria revealed more about her ship's technology, which was unlike anything on Earth. The craft had a sophisticated defense system, as well as devices that could camouflage it to blend into its surroundings, making it nearly undetectable to any hostile forces. Despite its incredible technology, though, the ship was designed for peace, not war. We will have to rely on your world for help, the Loria explained one evening, as the two of them pored over maps of the surrounding region. I cannot risk calling upon my people directly, not yet. If the Zorak learn of my location, they will destroy anyone who attempts to assist me. Ethan nodded, his mind buzzing with new possibilities. The decision to stay hidden was clear, but what he had to do next was less certain. He didn't have the tools, the training, or the expertise, but he was not alone. He had the Loria, and somehow, they would figure it out together. In the quiet of the mountains, Ethan's life transformed. No longer just a hermit, he was now a protector of a princess, a reluctant soldier in a galactic struggle. And as he looked up at the stars, he realized that peace, true peace, would always be fleeting. To maintain it, one had to fight for it. The quiet life he had once cherished would never return, but a new purpose had emerged, one that would take him across the stars, fighting for the future of not just a princess, but an entire galaxy. And in this vast, uncharted expanse of the universe, Ethan had finally found a reason to leave behind the shadows of solitude and step into the light. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Ethan's understanding of the galactic conflict deepened. The Loria's presence in his life was a constant reminder of the weight of the situation. She was a princess, yes, but she was also a fugitive, hunted by ruthless enemies who would stop at nothing to capture her. Ethan had no illusions about the danger they were in, but as he helped her prepare, his resolve grew. The remote mountain cabin had once been his sanctuary, a place of isolation where he could escape the noise of the world. Now, it had become a staging ground for something far greater than either of them could have anticipated. The wilderness around them seemed almost like a shield, hiding them from the prying eyes of any forces that might be searching. One morning, as Ethan brewed coffee over the fire, the Loria approached him with a device in her hand, something that looked like a small, cylindrical tablet. Her expression was more serious than usual, and it made Ethan's stomach twist with unease. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the tablet. "A message," the Loria replied, her tone tight. She set the device down on a nearby rock and activated it. A soft glow emanated from the screen, and for the first time, Ethan saw a face he hadn't expected, a tall, imposing man with dark eyes and a harsh expression. His skin was an unusual shade of deep blue, and his features were sharp, almost predatory. "This is General Kalon of the Zorak," the Loria said, her voice cold. "One of the leaders hunting me." The hologram flickered as the general spoke, his voice deep and grating. "Princess the Loria, you cannot hide forever. Your people's power is mine for the taking. Surrender now, and you may live. Resist, and the consequences will be severe." The message ended abruptly, and the glow from the device faded, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. Ethan felt his heart rate quicken. This was real. The danger was no longer distant or abstract. It was here, and the Zorak were relentless. The general's words haunted him, reminding him that there was no place in the galaxy where they could hide forever. "How long do we have?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "I do not know," the Loria answered quietly, "but it won't be long. They will track me, and when they do, they won't hesitate. Kalon is ruthless, and he is prepared to destroy entire worlds to get what he wants." Ethan's mind raced. There was no way he could defeat the Zorak with sheer force, but he had one thing on his side, his knowledge of the terrain, his ability to blend into the wilderness, and his understanding of how to remain unseen. He had lived in isolation for years, but he had learned things along the way, things that could be useful now. "I'm not going to let them take you," Ethan said firmly. "We'll have to outsmart them. We need to move quickly, stay off their radar, and find a way to stop them from getting to you." Thaloria's eyes softened, gratitude filling them. "I knew I came to the right place. You're the only one who understands what it means to live without the constant threat of war. Ethan, I cannot repay you for this." "You don't have to," Ethan replied, his voice resolute. "Just focus on getting us out of this mess." The next few days were filled with frantic preparation. Thaloria's ship, hidden deep in the forest, was more than just a vessel, it was a fortress in disguise. Its cloaking technology made it nearly invisible to any surveillance. But they needed to move quickly. Kalon's forces would be searching the area soon, and they couldn't afford to wait until they were discovered. Ethan, for the first time in years, felt the weight of responsibility. His peaceful life was gone, but he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of purpose. He wasn't just hiding from the Zorak anymore, he was fighting for something that mattered. Thaloria was right. He understood what it meant to want peace, and now, he was willing to risk everything to help her achieve it. They spent hours setting up traps around the cabin and the surrounding forest. Ethan showed Thaloria how to create makeshift alarms from the natural surroundings, how to use the sounds of the forest to alert them to any approaching danger. It was a rudimentary form of defense, but it would have to do. They couldn't afford sophisticated technology. They only had the land and their wits. As nightfall approached, Ethan and Thaloria made their final preparations. The ship was ready, cloaked in the shadows of the trees, its engines silent and waiting. They had one chance to escape, and they would have to take it. The only question was whether they could move fast enough before Kalon's forces found them. "You should rest," Thaloria suggested, her tone gentle. "You've done so much already." Ethan shook his head, unwilling to stop now. "There's no time for rest. We have to go. The longer we stay, the more dangerous it gets." She smiled faintly, understanding his determination. "You're right, then we go together." As the night stretched on, the wind picking up in the mountains, Ethan's senses were on high alert. The forest was eerily quiet, and the faint hum of the ship was the only sound that kept him grounded. Thaloria stood beside him, her posture regal even in the midst of their desperation. They had become more than just an unlikely duo, they were partners in a struggle for survival, for something greater than either of them could have imagined. The first sign of danger came as a flicker of movement in the trees, a shadow darting between the trunks. Ethan's breath caught, and he instinctively pulled Thaloria back, his hand gripping her arm. "They're here," he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. Thaloria nodded, her gaze steely. "Stay close, we'll make it." The sound of boots crunching on the forest floor grew louder, and Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The Zorak were close, but he wasn't going to let them take her, not without a fight. As the moonlight broke through the dense trees, illuminating the path ahead, Ethan knew there was no turning back. The quiet life he had once known was gone forever. What lay ahead was a dangerous, uncertain future, filled with threats he could scarcely comprehend. But one thing was clear, he would fight for it, for Thaloria, and for the peace that was worth defending. And as they made their way toward the hidden ship, Ethan couldn't help but think, maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this after all. The universe was vast, but they would fight for their place in it, together. The night was still, save for the soft rustle of leaves and the steady thrum of Ethan's heartbeat. The Zorak were close now, too close. Ethan's instincts, honed over years of isolation, told him they were just beyond the tree line. The flickering shadows and the sharp sounds of movement were unmistakable. He crouched low, pulling Thaloria down beside him behind a cluster of thick shrubs. She was unervingly calm, her eyes scanning the darkness, her posture regal even in such a tense moment. Ethan's pulse raced as he silently watched the first Zorak soldier step into the clearing, his body covered in dark, reflective armor that seemed to shimmer like liquid metal. The soldier's head swiveled, scanning the area with an almost predatory gaze. Ethan held his breath. Thaloria's ship was close, but the moment they moved toward it, they would be spotted. It was a gamble, an uncertain move that could expose them both to immediate danger. The Zorak soldier took another step forward, his boot brushing the forest floor with a soft, crunching noise. Ethan barely contained his movement, feeling every fiber of his being scream to act. The Loria placed a calming hand on his shoulder. Her touch was cool and steady, grounding him. "They're not just looking for me," the Loria murmured. "They've been here before, and they know the terrain. The only reason they haven't found us yet is because of your traps." Ethan nodded, his focus unbroken. "They won't find us. Not yet." The soldier took another step forward, his arm raising to signal his comrades. Ethan's heart skipped. The others were close. He needed a distraction, something that would keep them off the trail long enough for them to make it to the ship. "Stay here," he whispered to the Loria. "I'll get their attention. You head to the ship. I'll meet you there." The Loria's gaze was unwavering, but she shook her head. "You're not going alone." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but she silenced him with a look. "We're in this together. If they find you, they'll find me too." There was no arguing with that. In that moment, Ethan realized how much had changed. This wasn't just about protecting her anymore, it was about protecting each other. The solitude he had longed for seemed like a lifetime ago, and as crazy as it was, part of him couldn't imagine leaving her behind now. He gave a slight nod. "All right, together." The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would create a diversion, force the Zorak soldiers into the trap Ethan had set earlier, and use the chaos to slip past them and get to the ship. It would take everything they had, but there was no other choice. With a final glance toward the approaching soldiers, Ethan pushed off from the ground and darted toward the side, quickly blending into the shadows. The Loria followed close behind, her footsteps barely audible on the soft earth. He moved as quickly and silently as he could, positioning himself near the first of his traps. A pile of branches and loose rocks he had carefully arranged was the key. With a quiet but decisive motion, he kicked it, sending the pile tumbling to the ground with a loud crash. Immediately, the Zorak soldier turned, his eyes scanning the area. "Did you hear that?" he barked, signaling to the others. They began to move toward the noise, their movements precise and swift. Ethan knew he had only a few moments to act. He motioned for the Loria to move to the left, where another set of traps lay in wait. "Go," he whispered, and she moved without hesitation, her figure vanishing into the shadows. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest as he sprinted across the clearing, his boots barely making a sound. The soldiers were distracted, but they were quickly regrouping. They were trained, efficient, and they wouldn't fall for the diversion for long. Suddenly, a sharp whistle echoed from behind him. Ethan spun around, his hand already reaching for the nearby rock he had set as a decoy. A second group of soldiers had emerged from the trees, their eyes locking onto him. "Move!" The Loria's voice rang out from the left, and Ethan didn't hesitate. He ducked low, sprinting toward the sound of her footsteps. The Zorak soldiers were closing in, but they were a step behind. Ethan could hear their pursuit growing louder as they charged after him, their boots pounding the ground. The Loria reached him first, her hand outstretched, and together they sprinted toward the cloaked ship. The engine hummed softly as they approached, but the ship itself remained hidden, barely visible to the naked eye. With a final burst of energy, Ethan and the Loria reached the hatch. Ethan was the first to duck inside, pulling the Loria in behind him. The door sealed with a hiss, and for a moment, they both just stood there, panting, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. The ship was small, but its interior was sleek and sophisticated, with various control panels and glowing screens that the Loria quickly activated. "Where are they?" Ethan asked breathlessly, trying to keep his voice steady. "How close are they?" The Loria was already working on the controls, her fingers moving with ease over the alien technology. "They're close, but not close enough. We have a few minutes before they realize we're gone." Ethan looked out the small viewport, his gaze piercing through the thick forest. He could see movement in the trees, dark figures weaving through the underbrush, but they were too far away to make out clearly. It wouldn't be long before they figured out the ship was gone. "How do we get out of here?" Ethan asked, his mind still racing from the chase. The Loria met his eyes, her expression serious but resolute. "I can cloak the ship. It'll be hard for them to track us, but we can't stay too long. Once we leave the atmosphere, we'll be safe for a while, but we need to go now." Ethan nodded. He had no idea how long they would have before Kalon's forces found a way to track them again. They had taken a huge risk, and there was no guarantee the Zorak wouldn't find them again. But for now, they had a chance. The Loria activated the ship's engines, and the vessel began to rise from the ground, gliding silently above the treetops. As they soared into the night sky, Ethan looked down at the mountains below, his home, the place he had sought peace, now a distant memory. But as the stars stretched out before him, a new sense of purpose filled him. He wasn't just running from danger anymore. He was fighting for a future, for something much bigger than himself. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt that he was part of something worth protecting. The ship ascended smoothly, cutting through the atmosphere with silent precision. Ethan watched as the treetops below began to shrink into the distance, swallowed by the vast expanse of the night. The familiar mountain landscape he had called home for so many years faded into the backdrop of stars. He had spent a lifetime avoiding the world, but now it seemed that world had come to him, and somehow, amidst the chaos, he felt a flicker of determination. Perhaps the quiet life he had once sought was never meant to be his. The Loria sat at the controls, her expression calm but focused. Her fingers danced over the alien interface, activating cloaking mechanisms and adjusting navigation systems. The ship's sleek, organic design hummed with quiet power. Ethan could feel it, the raw energy of the craft beneath his feet, a reminder of just how far out of his depth he had become. "Where are we headed?" Ethan asked, his voice low as he leaned back in the seat beside her. The Loria glanced up, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the control panel. "We need to leave the planet's orbit and make our way to a safe zone, an old outpost, a place the Zorak don't know about." "Are we going to your people?" Ethan asked cautiously, not sure how to phrase the question. "To the Tenerife?" Her eyes darkened at the mention of her people. "Not yet. It's too dangerous. If I went back now, it would be a death sentence, not just for me, but for everyone who tries to help me. The Zorak have spies everywhere. They would find me before I even got close." Ethan nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The Loria wasn't just running from her enemies. She was protecting an entire galaxy from a brutal war that could consume it all. He had never imagined his life would intersect with something so monumental. But now, every choice he made would have ripples far beyond the peaceful mountain cabin he once called home. The ship was now outside of Earth's atmosphere, the vastness of space opening before them, infinite and full of potential. But with that vastness came danger, the danger of being hunted by an enemy that had no hesitation in destroying anything in its path. The Loria adjusted the ship's trajectory, pulling them into a narrow hyperspace lane. "We should be in the safe zone within a few hours," she said, her voice calm but laced with exhaustion. Ethan could sense the weight of the situation settling over her. She wasn't just tired from their flight, she was carrying the burden of a galaxy on her shoulders. It was easy for him to focus on the immediate danger, the Zorak soldiers in the forest, the ships that might be chasing them, but the Loria was fighting for something much bigger. Her people, her entire species, the future of the Tenerife Empire. He leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. The quiet life he had once clung to seemed almost like a fantasy now. He had been thrust into something far larger than he had ever imagined, and there was no going back. He had chosen to stand by the Loria, and now, the path ahead was uncertain, but the stakes were clear. As the stars streaked by outside the viewport, he felt the Loria's eyes on him, and he turned to meet her gaze. There was a depth in her expression, a quiet gratitude mixed with a hint of sadness. "You're different now, Ethan," she said softly. "You've chosen this. You didn't have to. You could have left when you had the chance." Ethan shrugged, a hint of a smile on his lips. "I don't know. Maybe I was never meant to be alone. But you're right about one thing. This is bigger than me." The Loria studied him for a moment, her gaze searching, as though she were looking for something she hadn't quite found yet. "You didn't have to choose to fight, to risk everything, but you did. I can't pretend I understand everything about your world, but I do understand courage, and I'm grateful for it." Ethan felt a lump in his throat at her words. There were no grand gestures, no speeches, just quiet acknowledgement. It was as if, in that brief moment, they shared a silent understanding. They were both in this together, no matter where the journey would take them. Before he could respond, the ship suddenly jolted, and the control panel blinked red. The Loria's fingers flew over the console, her calm demeanor shifting to one of alert focus. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What's going on? He asked, instinctively bracing himself. Zorak ships, the Loria said through clenched teeth. They've found us. They must have tracked our hyperspace signature. The ship rocked again, this time with more force. Ethan's eyes darted around, his mind racing. They had been so close to escaping. How had they been tracked? The Loria's hands moved swiftly across the controls, pulling the ship into a sharp evasive maneuver. I can't outrun them in hyperspace. We have to enter normal space and hide, she said urgently, her voice full of determination. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear the sound of distant engines. He knew they were closing in fast. He looked out the viewport, his eyes scanning the vastness of space for any sign of the approaching ships. The Zorak were relentless. They wouldn't give up easily. The ship suddenly dropped out of hyperspace, entering the quiet emptiness of normal space. The stars around them seemed to stretch and expand as they shifted, and Ethan's stomach lurched. They had made it. For now. The Loria turned to him, her face serious. We need to find a place to hide. There's an asteroid field nearby. We can use it to cover our tracks. Ethan didn't need any further prompting. The asteroid field was their best chance of evading the Zorak long enough to regroup. The Loria expertly navigated the ship toward the rocky field, her hands steady on the controls. The ship weaved between massive chunks of rock, the view outside a blur of dark shadows and floating debris. Hold on, the Loria warned, and in that moment, the ship jerked sharply, diving toward a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. Ethan gripped the seat tightly, his mind racing. The Zorak were coming, but they had a chance, just a slim chance, to escape. As they dove deeper into the asteroid field, Ethan felt the first glimmer of hope in a long time. They weren't out of danger yet, but they were still alive, and for the first time since meeting the Loria, he realized that he wasn't just protecting her. They were protecting each other. Together, they could survive whatever came next. And in the darkness of space, as they navigated the shifting dangers of the asteroid field, Ethan made a vow to himself. He would fight for her people, and for the future they both hoped to see, no matter the cost. The ship maneuvered gracefully through the asteroid field, dodging jagged rocks and debris as it hurtled through the void of space. The Zorak ships, still a distant presence, were no longer in sight, but Thaloria's eyes remained fixed on the controls. Ethan could feel the tension radiating from her, a constant undercurrent beneath her calm exterior. She was on edge, calculating their next move, but he knew they didn't have much time before the Zorak realized they'd evaded them. How long can we stay here? Ethan asked, his voice low as he watched the asteroids pass by like silent sentinels in the dark. Thaloria's hands danced over the controls as she adjusted the ship's cloaking mechanisms. As long as we need to, she replied, but there was an edge to her tone that suggested uncertainty. We've bought ourselves some time, but not enough. The Zorak won't give up easily. They'll have ships scanning the field soon, looking for us. Ethan nodded, understanding. The asteroid field, while offering temporary concealment, was not a long-term solution. They needed a new plan, and fast. We need a place to regroup, somewhere outside of their reach, he said, trying to think through their options. Do you have another safe zone? A location they won't know about? The Loria hesitated for a moment, her gaze distant as though weighing her options. There is one place, she said finally, an old ally, far enough from Zorak patrols, but it's a risk. I'm not sure they'll be willing to help us now. It's been years since I've contacted them. Ethan's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. Is it a risk worth taking? She turned to meet his gaze, her expression unreadable. Yes, but it could mean exposing us to more danger. If they refuse, we'll have no choice but to keep running. Ethan's mind flashed to the planet below, to the quiet life he had left behind. He had never asked for any of this. But he wasn't about to let the Loria face this war alone, not now. Not after everything they had been through. He wasn't going to run anymore. Let's do it, he said firmly, locking eyes with her. We don't have much choice. The Loria gave a small nod, her fingers already moving to plot the coordinates. The ship hummed quietly, responding to her touch as she adjusted their course. I'll send a message first, she said, to gauge their willingness to assist. If they agree, we'll be there in a few hours. Ethan settled back in his seat, his thoughts drifting back to the forest, to the dangers they had narrowly escaped. But he knew the worst was yet to come. The Zorak were relentless, and Kalon, General Kalon, was a force to be reckoned with. The dark figure from the hologram message still haunted his thoughts. If Kalon had already sent his best forces after the Loria, then there was little doubt that the entire galaxy would soon be embroiled in a war. "How many people know about this place you're sending us to?" Ethan asked, trying to get a sense of the risk they were taking. "Very few," the Loria replied, her voice distant, thoughtful. "The ally I'm contacting is an old friend, someone I trust, but I can't say how much help they can offer. They're isolated now, hidden, like I am. They may not even be in a position to assist us." Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the uncertainty. It wasn't the reassurance he had hoped for, but it was the only lead they had. He trusted the Loria, but the dangers of the universe were vast, and alliances in this part of space were often fragile. "What happens if they won't help?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The Loria turned to him, her eyes resolute. "Then we keep moving. We find another way, but I won't give up, Ethan. Not until I've done everything I can to stop Kalon and his forces." Ethan's heart skipped a beat at her words. There was fire in her voice now, an unyielding determination that matched the fierce resolve he had seen in her since the moment they met. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone, her people, the galaxy. She was willing to risk everything, and somehow, so was he. The hum of the ship's engines slowed as the Loria prepared to send the encrypted message. She began typing a series of symbols and codes into the console, each one a step closer to reaching her old ally. "Sending now," she said quietly, her fingers moving with precision. Ethan watched her work, the glow of the console reflecting in her eyes. Despite the overwhelming uncertainty, there was something almost serene in the way she moved. She was a princess, yes, but she was also a warrior, and she had a plan. That gave Ethan more hope than he had allowed himself to feel in a long time. The minutes ticked by in silence as the ship continued its slow journey through the asteroid field. The stars outside were little more than pinpricks of light in the vast expanse of space. Ethan glanced over at the Loria, her expression unreadable, waiting for any sign of a response. Then, the console beeped, and a new message appeared on the screen. "Response received," the Loria said, her voice steady but edged with anticipation. She read the message quickly, her eyes scanning the text before she spoke again. "They've agreed to help. They're sending coordinates to a neutral station nearby. We'll be there in a few hours." Ethan felt a surge of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, they had a chance, a real chance, to regroup, to plan their next move. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. The Zorak were still out there, hunting them relentlessly, and the deeper they went into this war, the more dangerous things would become. The Loria turned to him then, her gaze softening. "Thank you, Ethan. I know you didn't have to be involved in all this, but you've shown me something I didn't know I was looking for." Ethan met her gaze, his heart full. "I don't regret it," he said quietly. "You've made me realize that I can't just sit on the sidelines anymore. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know I'm not walking away from this fight." The Loria smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Then we fight together." And with that, as the ship hurtled through the dark vastness of space toward the unknown, Ethan knew that there was no turning back. Whatever came next, whatever the Zorak, Kalon, or the galaxy itself threw at them, he would stand by Thaloria's side. Together, they would face whatever dangers awaited them, with the hope that, in the end, they would not only survive but fight for a future worth living for. The stars outside continued to drift by, endless and untouchable, but Ethan wasn't afraid. With the Loria by his side, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. And that, he realized, was worth everything.